Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Texas Scorecard page as we discuss some pretty breaking news today. I've got Jeremy Kitchen here, Capitol correspondent. I'm Brandon Waltons, managing editor. And we've been talking about it for several weeks now in this sort of build up to this special session. All right. So just a little bit of a refresh for folks. The regular 140-day legislative session ended on May 31st. Since then, kind of dangling over lawmakers has been this threat of a special session, which is a 30-day session on items that only the governor chooses for them to address. And now we've had a date for that for some time, which is tomorrow. Okay, that's July 8th. And now today, literally like 24 hours before they're set to meet, we have the items that they're going to be going over. There's actually some of these items are expected. We're going to go down through that list. Some of them are a surprise as well, I think. I think best way to do this, right? I think it's just if we can just dive right into some of these topics. And so this was all part of the proclamation that Governor Greg Abbott put out this morning. Like I said, listing these 11 items. And the first item, drum roll, I don't know, get the drum roll sound effect, drum roll, please, is bail reform.
Right. That's right. This is one of those items that failed, right? One of two items that failed in the same way at the end of the regular legislative session as a result of the kind of this deadline that happened. The House didn't get to the conference committee report in time due to the quorum busting by House Democrats that was enabled by House Republican leadership. And so, one of those.
Bail reform. This one's notable. This was one of two of Governor Greg Abbott's emergency priorities going into the session, right? That wasn't ultimately passed, didn't make it across the finish line. So bail reform being one of those, and being, I guess, the number one. If you want to look into or put any stock into how these are organized, right? They're not organized like alphabetically or anything. So I don't know, are they organized by importance? Are they random? I don't know. But bail reform, leads the list there, with the second being another priority of Governor Abbott's, and we've got a lot more to talk about on this issue, and that's election integrity.
That's right. This was the bill, if you will, that prompted the quorum busting that took place in the House. There's a lot, obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about here, that led up to that moment, but this is the omnibus election integrity bill. It took the final form of Senate Bill 7 during the regular session, authored by State Senator Brian Hughes and State Representative Briscoe Cain. That, of course, is on here again, and this has prompted probably over the last month, really, since it's been about a month since the end of the legislative session, all the media coverage has been pretty much about this issue.
Pretty much all of it. I mean, this has been what Democrats made their big stand, to your point, right? They were enabled by Republican leadership to make their big stand and walk out of the chamber and kill that legislation just, a little over a month ago at the end of the regular session. And since then, we've had a lot of discussion about election integrity. I think it's important to note, looking at just his wording, at least in the proclamation, legislation strengthening the integrity of elections in Texas.
That's right.
Which can mean a number of different things.
Yeah, we thought it was a general statement in the original call during the regular session, because there were a lot of bills that could qualify, right, as seeking to protect integrity in elections, and there were several bills that kind of fit under that umbrella. But certainly this is even more generalized language.
Well, and not just that, but I think the big question that's on a lot of people's minds is, okay, we had this legislation that. Was it perfect? Probably not. Some people had issues with it, but you had this omnibus election integrity legislation right there at the end of the session, and obviously that was killed. So now when we're starting up here in July 8th, right, tomorrow, is that bill going to be better? Is it going to be stronger? Or is it going to be weaker than the one that was passed? Maybe we don't know the answer to that.
Right. I checked here right before we went on the air to see like what bills had been pre-filed. Because there are bills already being filed on this. I didn't see anything directly related to like an omnibus election integrity bill. There are a few, both by Republicans and Democrats, that kind of touch smaller issues that fit under that umbrella, but it's unclear as to who is carrying or whether they've broken up an omnibus bill and made it several bills, right?
I think it's important. You touch the bills are being filed. I'm just looking right here. As of right now, as we're talking about it, this is going to change. There's been 83 bills filed in the House. doesn't mean that all of these 83 bills, in fact, I'm kind of scrolling through it, most of them are not related to any of the items that we're going to talk about here that are on the call.
Right.
I guess it's kind of it's traditional for some lawmakers to just go ahead and throw everything at the wall in a special session, even if it's not something that they're
Sure.
going to be able to address.
They get to say they tried, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you never know, right? Maybe the call can be changed throughout the specials. So.
Right. I'm seeing a Democrat, Barbara Gervin
She had a
Hawkins
lot, yeah.
wants firearm safety awareness month.
That's right.
So you certainly have things like that. So that's election integrity. That's going to be the one that I think all the bets right now would say would garner maybe the majority of the attention during this special session for the next 30 days.
I think it's important to note here, right? We talked about Republican leadership allowing this to happen in the House, but bail reform and election integrity, as we talked about, as they were priorities of Governor Abbott's, they could have been taken up. Right after Abbott gave his original declaration in the regular session on February 1st, they could have taken it up after then, right? In fact, constitutionally, that they're allowed to take up the emergency priorities during that time before they can take up all the other bills post 60 days into session, which is March 12th. And they didn't. The legislature did not do that. So by them, quote unquote, running out of time and a deadline, it's important to know, right? They could have potentially prevented that.
Exactly right. You talk about use of time. This is a common theme that we see this session. We've seen it in other legislative sessions, but certainly, wise use of time is certainly a big theme, I guess. What we can say we're going to see, and we'll see if it continues into this 30-day special session. I'm looking right here, right now. Suzanne, watching live, asks, "Is it unusual to wait until the day before session to announce priorities?" I would say that it certainly has been unusual in the sense that we've known that a special session has been coming, and yet we haven't had the actual priorities until now. I guess the only other time that we've had where we've seen Governor Greg Abbott do a special session before was back in 2017, and he announced what was going to be on that call well ahead of time.
That's right, and it was more than what we have here for sure. That's right. It's dependent on the governor, to be honest, right? I think there was a special session, I'm going to butcher the date, but under Governor Rick Perry, where it's like they rolled out of a regular session and right into a special session, right? And so there's nothing that requires him to have to do it like weeks ahead of time.
Yeah, so unusual, but not forbidden by any means, and certainly you see a little bit of that. But let's get back to these 11. So we got bail reform, right? Election integrity.
Right.
Now we got kind of Casey Kasem voice number 3, border security. This is an issue that Governor Abbott specifically, has really started leaning in on in the last several weeks. A lot of people speculating it's in response to some of the attacks he's gotten from Republican primary challengers that he hasn't been strong enough on the border. Folks may remember that border security was not one of Governor Greg Abbott's emergency priorities. It was not a priority for him during the legislative session at all. Now, in recent weeks, we've seen him say Texas is going to build a wall. He was down at the border with President Donald Trump last week, and now we've got an actual border security call where he says legislation providing funding to support law enforcement agencies, counties, and other strategies as part of Texas's comprehensive border security plan.
I think the other important thing to note there, outside of just the governor not prioritizing it, is Republican leadership didn't prioritize it in the legislature either. In fact, the only thing that came up was they funded, right, a kind of this general topic of border security or ongoing border security operations in the overall budget, over $1 billion to their credit. But they stopped short of giving any specific, remedy for a lot of the kind of stuff that either magnets or things that affect the overall issue. So
yeah, they put $1 billion towards it. We saw Governor Greg Abbott use his emergency powers to reallocate some other funds in the budget and put $250 million towards a down payment, is what he called it, right, of the start of the Texas border wall. We saw that a few weeks ago. I guess on one hand, this is good that we're actually seeing the legislature do some of this. People might remember State Representative Brian Slayton had a bill to build a wall to enhance border security during the session that was killed in the Texas House. And even after Governor Greg Abbott announced his plans to do so, Representative Slayton told us at Texas Scorecard, said, maybe this is a good move. We'll have to wait and see. But where's the legislature been in all this? And so
That's
now
right.
at least I guess the legislature is being put in there. There was another bill, though, in the Senate that would have accomplished some of this as well.
That's right. Senator Bob Hall had a bill. It passed the Senate, died in the House Calendars Committee, actually, that was relating to kind of creating an interstate compact, if you'll, to allow the state to enforce federal regulations on immigration and border security that the federal government's not doing. Again, that passed the Senate, died in the House Calendars Committee. And of course, we saw Governor Abbott acted after the legislature was done convening in regular session, joined in an already existing compact that did not necessarily the same thing, but it was a compact that requested logistical and personnel support from other states. So.
Is this going to have any effect? I mean, again, we've talked about some of these descriptions, right? And it's very important, the wording in these proclamations, very deliberate.
Yeah.
Some of these are more broad than others. Even this border security one seems a little bit broad. And so one of the questions, will this include a prohibition on those magnets like in-state tuition, right? That are part of the problem of attracting people and bringing people over to Texas and moving them here. We've seen you wrote about State Representative Jeff Kaysen specifically asking for the special session to address this.
That's right. He submitted a letter last week to Governor Abbott requesting that it at least specifically be on the call. He did talk about magnets generally, but specifically talked about a bill he filed in the regular session that, again, never got a hearing in the House, which notably on that, by the way, that got referred to the House Higher Education Committee, which is chaired by Jim Murphy, who's the Republican caucus chairman, right? And this is a specific plank in the Republican platform that calls for ending magnets and specifically cites the ending in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. And so Jeff Kaysen asked again that Governor Abbott put this on the call. And you're right, to your point on language. Does it fit within the confines of his specific call? I don't know.
It's sort of a broad one. Perhaps it does, right?
Sure.
Ultimately, the real arbiter of this is Governor Abbott himself, right? Because he can decide whether or not he accepts something to sign it. He could also at any time, by the way, add to these calls throughout the session. So we've got our 11 right now, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily set in stone.
Sure.
So that's border security. Next one is social media censorship. This has been a hot topic, especially in recent months, as we've seen pages like Facebook, groups like Twitter, kicking off conservatives specifically for being conservative. We've seen probably the highest profile example is President Donald Trump being removed from both of those platforms. And there was legislation this session that would have guarded against that, and yet this was another example. And it's going to start to sound a little bit repetitive, which I think we can talk about after this. Is passed the Senate, killed in the House.
That's right. Died in the House. It died in the House in the last, kind of the waning days of the legislative session, if you will. What's notable about this, it took the form of Senate Bill 12 during the regular session. It was a bill by State Senator Brian Hughes, and the sponsor in the House was State Representative Scott Sanford. It had passed the Senate early. It was like April 1st. Died on the House floor. It was postponed several times. Reportedly had a lot of death blow points of order that were included in it. But what's notable about that is that it passed the Senate April 1st. The House didn't bring it up until May 25th. So once again, we see an example of their misuse of time potentially killed it. You could have maybe fixed those points of order, right? That sort of thing. And the other notable thing here is that this wasn't an explicit priority of Governor Abbott's, but he took the time during the regular session to go to a press conference out in Tyler, I guess it was, with Senator Hughes. He made it sound like it was a priority of his. And it was just another one that didn't get across the finish line.
This was also one of the items that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has been pressing the Governor Abbott to call a special session on. And so this seems to be, right, if this gets across the line, a win for Patrick in that regard. This one is an interest. The next item, and it's kind of interesting, its placement here kind of nudged in the middle, is Article 10 funding. People may remember that after the end of the session and the way the session ended, it did, right, with some of these priorities being killed, Governor Greg Abbott said, well, I'm going to sign the budget, but I'm going to veto Article 10, right? This is what funds the legislature, right? Not so much, by the way, the legislators themselves, right? Because we're not even talking about their campaign accounts or any of this.
Sure.
But it's the legislature, like, the body and the staff and certain agencies.
Right.
So he vetoed, he followed through on that threat. He vetoed Article 10 of the budget, the legislature funding. That goes into effect on September 1st. It's interesting to see he kind of used it as like this bargaining chip that, like, okay, you're gonna pass the things I want, and then you're gonna be able to restore Article 10 funding. At least that's how he made it sound. And yet, here it is in the middle of the list. So is this going to be one of the first items the legislature comes to and then they leave? I mean, I don't know.
It is certainly unclear. I think anyone that kind of looks at this, it's definitely a carrot and stick sort of thing, right? It's like holding it hostage and say, you're going to accomplish these things, and then we'll consider restoring your funding. What outside of the election integrity sort of thing, dovetailed into that narrative over the past month has been mainly House Democrats, but collectively Democrats complaining that, this affects 2,000 plus state employees, right? They've asked the Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, to weigh in on this sort of thing. And so it's created its own kind of kerfuffle, if you will, of issues post regular session as well. So
another item on here, kind of a bit of a surprise, not one that people were talking about, I think, in the last couple of weeks, but is family violence prevention. It says legislation similar to Senate Bill 1109 from the 87th, and I'll ask you what that is in a second. But it says requiring schools to provide appropriate education to middle and high school students about dating violence, domestic violence, and child abuse, but that recognizes the right of parents to opt their children out of the instruction. That Senate Bill 1109, that was a Democrat bill from the session. And sort of an interesting look. I'll admit, I haven't looked at the bill. I don't know much about it yet, right? But this certainly was not one of the big topics, I think, that people were talking about potentially being on a special session, and yet here it is, kind of a surprise.
That's right. It's on here specifically, I think, because Abbott vetoed it. It was one of the 20 bills he ended up vetoing at the end of the legislative session. He, in his veto statement, he specifically cited wanting what he called a narrower approach on allowing, like, he supported the idea, but he wants to allow parents to opt their children out of such instruction if they see fit. It's notable here, when this bill went through the regular session, it passed the Senate 28-2. It passed the House on the local and consent calendar. Now, granted, there were 48 people that signed up against it, but it's funny that it went through the local and consent calendar, and then he gets to the governor and gets vetoed.
So that explains a little bit more, right, of how that got on there. So the next one, this is a bigger ticket item here, is youth sports, protecting women's sports, right? And specifically his wording here, and we talked about some of this wording really mattering, and we'll talk about it in this case, says legislation identical to Senate Bill 29, disallowing a student from competing in UIL athletic competitions designated for the sex opposite to the student's sex at birth. Now, the important, I think, takeaway there is that this is a pretty narrow call.
Correct.
This really can't be expanded, right? Even to colleges.
Yeah, the bill, Senate Bill 29, again, he says identical, only affected, right? I think it was K through 12 instruction. Those that fall under the UIL, University Interscholastic, I forget what it stands for, sorry.
Yeah,
UIL,
Universal
Athletic Competition
League, yeah.
That's right. Things that fall under that, so K through 12. And, this has its own kind of story, this legislative saga that took place over the regular session. I think it's important to note here, yet again, for timing purposes, this is something that Lieutenant Governor Patrick Wright had on his list, but it passed the Senate mid-April, and the House chose not to do anything with it until the end of May, right? Now, in fairness, the chairman of the House Public Education Committee, Democrat, Harold Dutton, who ended up being the sponsor of this bill, had originally said, don't have the votes, it's going to fail. It did. It failed in that committee, right? And then in response to another bill, this is like Democrat infighting, State Representative Dutton moved the bill just randomly, kind of like it passed his committee suddenly, gets put on the floor, and then what happens on the floor is just kind of like the Senate Bill 12 we talked about earlier. He postponed it to death, and it died, right? And so,
Interesting. So that's certainly going to be one to watch during this special session. Next item here: abortion-inducing drugs. Legislation to prohibit people from providing abortion-inducing drugs by mail or delivery service. Strengthen the laws applicable to the reporting of abortions and abortion complications, and ensures that no abortion-inducing drugs are provided unless there is a voluntary and informed consent. And this was as well, right? These were bills that were killed, that passed the Senate actually, and were killed in the House during
Once
the session.
again, this passed the Senate early. This was one bill, I think, in a package of 7, if I recall correctly. It passed the Senate on March 30th during the regular session, and it died in the House Calendars Committee. It got sent there on April 28th, a month before the end of session, and the Calendars Committee never put it on a calendar. The thing that's notable for me on this is that it had 52 Republican sponsors in the House. 52 out of the 83 Republicans there, and it still didn't get put out of the House Calendars Committee. So
wow. Yeah. Next item here, moving right along, is the 13th check. Now, what is a 13th check, you ask? Well, that is a one-time supplemental payment of benefits for the Teachers Retirement System of Texas. Okay, this is as the name suggests, it's the retirement, kind of benefits wing that provides those for teachers in Texas. We saw a few years ago the legislature do this 13th check thing, which is just kind of additional money.
Sure.
Looks like they want to do it again.
Seemingly.
Is it a 14th check now?
Right. So ultimately what this does is the benefits that folks that use the teacher retirement system get monthly. There were complaints. There's been complaints for years, but there's complaints that kind of cost of living, if you will, has gone up, but yet they still get I think it comes out to about $2,000 a month. And for some, especially in urban areas and stuff, they can't survive off that. And so they asked for an increase, if you will, this 13th check, 12 months in a year, right? There's a lot of notable things about this. One is that it was filed by State Representative Glenn Rogers in the House Bill 3507 in the regular session, freshman legislator, by the way. It died in the House Calendars Committee. The Senate didn't consider it. It had 124 co-authors on the bill out of 150 state legislators, and it still didn't get out of House Calendars.
Honestly.
Right. To kind of cap this out, right? It does. There have been issues for years dealing with the actuarial soundness of the TRS system, right? Of the teacher retirement system, and there are a lot of people that have, I think rightfully so, have asked, is this a good use of money? Should we reform the system first before we have to keep doing this?
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about spending money here in just a second, but the second to last one of the issues. Governor Greg Abbott announced this morning that lawmakers will have the opportunity to vote on during the special session, which starts tomorrow, July 8th, is critical race theory ban. Now, am I wrong in saying I thought, right, I had heard from lawmakers that they had already done this during the regular session, and yet Governor Greg Abbott said what they passed was not enough.
That's right. The bill that passed in the 87th regular session was House Bill 3979 by State Representative Steve Toth. They're out of the Woodlands. The sponsor was State Senator Brandon Creighton. They're in the Senate. Again, another one of those bills that have this kind of ongoing legislative saga, but brass tacks was the bill, got amended to death practically especially by House Democrats in the House. Some of those amendments were accepted, added on. People were always told that, hey, this is just going to go until, it's just going to, the conference committee will take them out. The Senate, to their credit, originally took almost all the amendments off. And then when it came back to the House, a Democrat state representative called a point of order. It was sent back to the Senate. Ultimately, all of those amendments were pretty much added back on. And you have a weaker critical race theory ban bill that was that. Now, the author, State Representative Steve Toth, continues to say that it's the strongest ban in the nation.
Right.
But it's interesting because in the signing statement that Governor Abbott, when he signed the bill, it basically said, it's a great ban, but we need to do unknown improvements to it in a special session.
And so we'll see what that means. I mean, he says, legislation similar to House Bill 3979 as it passed out of the Senate.
Right.
So
Which
kind of
without those amendments.
another rebuke of the House here in his special session agenda. The last item here, the 11th item on the list, is a list of appropriations. So you can actually kind of divide it into three.
Sure.
But it's legislation providing appropriations, providing money, right, from additional available general revenue for the following purposes: property tax relief, enhanced protection for the safety of children in Texas foster care system, and to better safeguard the state from potential cybersecurity threats. Now, property tax relief, I mean, that's something that you've heard folks like, I had Michael on the headline actually recently, and he kind of threw that out as a suggestion of what could potentially be done now with some available revenue funds. But, if that's kind of an interesting admission there if they do that, just a few months ago when they passed the regular budget, there was no additional property tax relief in there.
They had just maintained the what had existed previously, even though Texans all across the state are having increased property tax burdens. And so certainly it's this kind of shrouded like, oh, well, we need to do this. Now we realize we didn't do it. Yeah.
And then you've got foster care system, as well as the cybersecurity threats. Cybersecurity threats, right? That's something that's been in the news lately. And so we'll see how much the legislature decides not to appropriate to these three things. I think right now a lot of homeowners, to your point, are saying, please, some property tax relief would be pretty nice.
Absolutely. I think the other thing to note here is that they passed what everyone's dubbed as a conservative budget during the regular session. How much money are we talking about here? Right? It's unknown how much money they're going to throw at things like property tax relief or incentives for foster care, ride homes, that sort of thing. We don't know yet. So.
Okay. So those are the items. Those are the 11 items, right? You can check out that list at texasscorecard.com. We've got the list there straight from Governor Greg Abbott's office. Real quick before we wrap up, I want to kind of talk about some of the stuff that's not on that list. We talked about this before we went on. I mean, there are some notable exceptions here, things that people thought would perhaps be on there, things that grassroots citizens were fighting for that aren't on the list. What are some of those?
Sure, absolutely. I think first and foremost is one of the three that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick had asked almost immediately at the end of session when he realized some of his priorities had died, and that's a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying. Now, what's notable there, right, is that if you recall during the regular session, a statewide ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying went nowhere. It was heard one time in the House, went nowhere. The Senate prioritized Senate Bill 10, which was a ban on for cities and counties. Yeah. It was changed in the House State Affairs Committee to include almost all local jurisdictions, but then a bunch of loopholes were added into it. And then as a result of that, it got put to the floor. There were supposed points of order. The House sponsor, State Representative Chris Patty, who has been opposed to a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying in the past, postponed it basically to death, notably postponed it to Mays Middleton's birthday as kind of this stick in the air, if you will, to Representative Middleton, and it ultimately died. And that, of course, is not put on there. This is, of course, a Republican Party of Texas priority. I think primary language, ballot language. Last cycle was 95% of Republicans supported it.
It was huge. I mean, this issue polls really, really strongly, even outside of Republicans, some of the polls that I've seen. So that's going to be a notable exception. But you mentioned Republican Party of Texas priorities that are missing on there. Gender modification, right? That's one that's a Republican Party of Texas priority that a lot of people have fought really hard for, that doesn't seem to have been made important enough to make the list.
That's right. It is, again, not on the list. I think it bears repeating here that the Senate passed two bills related to this during the regular session, and the House slow-walked, did everything they could to essentially kill these bills, both via the House Calendars Committee and on the floor when it got buried under a bunch of bills. So, yeah, sad to see that not on there.
Some other Republican Party of Texas priorities that aren't on the list include monument protection, school choice for all, executive overreach, probably not that much of a surprise that the governor's not going to put a special session item to limit his own power, but there's that. And even some people were talking about some of these, COVID vaccine mandates, maybe something to address that. That doesn't seem to be in the call right now. And so the big question before we go here is, okay, we've got all these items. And by the way, it's worth noting, I think, that before the special session, right, while it was being talked about, the governor said that, well, I'm going to do one item at a time.
Right.
And when they pass that item, then I'll put the next item on the list. Seems to have abandoned that idea.
Right.
The question is, by doing that now, where he's got all the cards out on the table, is do Democrats show up?
Right. I mean, you've had in the course of the last month, you've had several Democrats indicate that they would entertain busting quorum or leaving again, especially on the election integrity issue. You've had, they founded that new House committee, I guess, yesterday, and there was a letter that was submitted by some, not the entire Democrat caucus, but I think it was 36 Democrats in the House.
Wow.
Basically, this veiled threat demand letter to Speaker Phelan saying, you're going to operate the House this way, or we might not cooperate. Right?
Wow. So that's gonna be the big question, right? But of course, the real question is gonna be not just if Democrats leave, right? But will Republicans enable that to happen?
Sure, that's right.
We're gonna be following all of that. I know, Jeremy, you're gonna be watching this really closely. Yeah. What time does all the action begin?
Sure, 10 a.m. tomorrow is the beginning. July 8th is the beginning of the first special session. So.
These last for 30 days, up to 30 days at a time. And so we'll see how much if any additional items get put on, if all of these pass. We're going to be following all of that at TexasScorecard.com. Really encourage y'all to follow along with us during the session. Please don't hesitate to reach out or contact either of us if you have any questions. But for right now, thank you for joining us on this special edition here right now as we look through these special session items. Hope you have a great day.